My Thomas Story Library, The Snowy Special. This is a story about Henry, who one snowy day thought he couldn't manage without his lucky trucks. But as you and I both know, really useful engines don't need trucks to be lucky. Winter had arrived on Sodor, and a thick blanket of snow covered the island. Snowdrifts blocked many of the lines, and the tracks were very slippery. The engines felt frozen from their funnels to their footplates. But Henry the Green Engine puffed happily through the snowy countryside. None of his lines were blocked. That evening, Henry met Thomas in Timothy's sheds. "You are the only engine to have made your deliveries on time today," chuffed Thomas. "You must have lucky trucks." Henry saw that none of the other engines were back. "Maybe you're right, Thomas," Henry puffed. "Maybe I do have lucky trucks." One by one, the engines returned to the shed. It was very late. When the other engines were all asleep, Henry thought how pleased he was to have lucky trucks. "Now I will always be on time," he puffed happily, "and that means I can be a really useful engine." But the next morning, when Henry went to the yard, his lucky trucks weren't there. "Oh no!" Henry whistled. "Where are they?" "Edward took your trucks," puffed Thomas. "He needed them to take coal to the villages." The Fat Controller arrived at the yard. He had a special for Henry. "A delivery of presents has arrived at the airport. You must collect them and take them to the children in the villages." So Henry set off for the airport, but he soon ran into trouble. Gordon's Hill was very icy. Every time Henry tried to puff up the hill, he slid back down again. It took a long time to reach the top. "I need my lucky trucks back," Henry huffed. "I can't make my deliveries without them." Henry was worried. "I must find Edward! I must find Edward!" he puffed. Henry steamed on through the snow. Up ahead, he saw logs across the track. They had fallen off James's flat truck and were blocking Henry's way. "Oh no!" puffed Henry. "If I'd had my lucky trucks, this would never have happened." "Where are all the presents?" snorted James. "Your special is to go to the airport." "Edward has my lucky trucks," whistled Henry. "I must find him first." Henry shivered sadly on the track until Rocky the rescue crane arrived. "Don't worry," called Rocky cheerily. "I'll have the line cleared in no time." Soon Rocky had cleared the logs from the track, and Henry chopped on to find Edward and his lucky trucks. But everywhere that Henry chuffed, there were more delays. "Sorry," puffed Thomas. It has taken me a long time to clear the snow from the line." "It's not your fault," Henry wheezed. "I need to find Edward and my lucky trucks." And Henry puffed sadly away. He couldn't find Edward anywhere. "I'll never see my lucky trucks again," he sighed. But when he reached the frosty forest, there was Edward, with Henry's lucky trucks. "I found you!" Henry chuffed excitedly. But Henry was going too quickly. His wheels slid on the icy tracks, and he biffed straight into his lucky trucks. "Oh no! I've broken my lucky trucks!" moaned Henry sadly. Henry put on his brakes and wheezed through his whistle. "I'm not going anywhere without my lucky trucks," he huffed. "But they're broken," chuffed Edward. And if you don't collect the presents soon, the children won't have anything to open." Henry thought about how sad the children would be. I have to get to the airport somehow, he puffed, with or without my lucky trucks. So Henry set off. The tracks were still very icy, and Henry's wheels started to spin and slip, but he kept going. The more Henry thought about the children, the less he thought about his lucky trucks. Before long, Henry arrived at the airport, and his crew loaded up the presents. Then Henry steamed quickly away to start his deliveries. I must deliver the presents on time, he puffed. He didn't want to let the children down. Henry puffed all over the island, dropping off the presents. Soon he was on his last delivery. He steamed into the station and saw the children waiting on the platform. Good old Henry! They cheered. Henry felt very proud. I've delivered all the presents without my lucky trucks, he peeped. Maybe the trucks weren't so lucky after all. And when Henry looked at the children's smiling faces, he knew he was still the luckiest engine on Sodor. My Thomas Story Library, Thomas to the Rescue. This is a story about two little tank engines that work on my railway. One day, Emily thought that she knew best and ended up in trouble. She needed a really useful engine to come to her rescue. One morning, the Fat Controller came to see Thomas and Emily at the main station. Emily will take your passengers today, the Fat Controller told Thomas. Diesel needs your help to pull trucks down at the quarry. Yes, sir, peeped Thomas. He knew that really useful engines pulled trucks as well as carriages. I'll take good care of Annie and Clarabelle, Emily promised. When Emily was coupled up to the carriages, she puffed steadily out of the station. Engines shouldn't go too fast, she said bossily when she saw Gordon and Percy. My journey will be slow and steady. Slow and steady? Scoffed Gordon. That's why little tank engines don't pull the express. Trains on Thomas's branch line are always on time, warned Percy. Don't go too slowly, Emily. Later that morning, Thomas was on his way to the quarry when he saw Emily. She was running very late. Hurry up, Emily! Really useful engines are always on time, Thomas whistled crossly. Take the line to Wellsworth, then go up Gordon's Hill until you reach Marin Station. That's the last stop. And he steamed away, his axles tingling. But Emily didn't listen. She thought that she knew best. I'll take a shortcut, she wished. Emily puffed on, in her slow and steady way. But the shortcut took her to Tidmouth Sheds instead of Wellsworth. We're ever so late! We're ever so late! Sang Annie and Clarabelle. Just then, Oliver chuffed by. What are you doing here, Emily? Thomas's trains are never late, he said. Emily was too proud to ask Oliver the way, so she steamed off again, not knowing where she was going. By the time Thomas puffed into Marin Station to take his carriages home, the sun was setting in the sky. Emily hasn't arrived, the Fat Controller boomed. Cinders and ashes, Thomas exclaimed. She must have got lost. Thomas knew what he had to do. He set off to find Emily as fast as his wheels could carry him. Thomas steamed over hills and through valleys. By now, it was very dark. At last, Thomas found Emily, looking cold, lonely, and miserable. I'm sorry I was so cross before, said Thomas. Follow me, and we'll puff home together. This time, Emily Emily did just as she was told. Percy was glad to see Thomas and Emily arrive back at the sheds, safe and sound. "Thank you, Thomas," said Emily. "I thought that I knew best. I should have asked Oliver for help when I didn't know the way." "Friends?" said Thomas kindly. "Firm friends," Emily smiled, and the two tank engines puffed into the sheds and were soon fast asleep. My Thomas Story Library, Haunted Henry. This is a story about Henry, who said he didn't believe in ghosts. But one misty autumn night, some spooky things began to happen that Henry couldn't explain. It was a moonlit autumn night on the island of Sodor. The Fat Controller had given Henry and Edward special jobs to do. Henry's job was to take a goods train along the old line. As they waited for their trains, the engines heard the hoot of an owl. "There's a legend that when that old owl hoots, a mist rolls in," said Edward. "They say it brings the ghost of a fogman who got lost in the mist long ago and was never found." "I don't believe in ghosts," Henry snorted with a puff of steam. "And neither should you. Don't you have enough to do without scaring yourself with silly stories?" But as Henry steamed off with his goods train, he couldn't help thinking about Edward's story. "Owls, mists, ghosts," he grumbled to himself. "Edward's going soft in the boiler. There's no mist tonight." But Henry was wrong. As he chopped down the old line, a thick blanket of mist settled over the rails. He could hardly see anything but the dark, spooky trees on either side of him. Through the mist, Henry saw a dim glow ahead. "What's that?" he asked fearfully. "It's an amber lamp," his driver said as they got closer. "It's a warning for us to be careful." Henry crept slowly forwards. He soon came to a tree with a sign that read, "Beware the Viaduct." "Strange," said the driver. "There's a fogman's coat hanging near that red signal." "Who's there?" he called, but no one answered. "Didn't Edward say the ghost was a fogman?" Henry puffed nervously. "But you don't believe in ghosts, Henry," his fireman teased. "Shall we go back to the yard?" Henry didn't answer. He just steamed away as fast as his wheels would carry him. By the next morning, the mist had cleared. A workman reported to Henry's driver that the viaduct was unsafe and being repaired. "We're lucky that we didn't cross it last night," puffed Henry. "Yes, but we still don't know who lit the amber lamp as a warning," said his driver. But Henry knew who had done it. The ghost. And when he learned that he had to take another train over the viaduct that very night, Henry's wheels whirred with worry. Just then, Thomas chopped into the yard. Henry told him about the legend and the spooky things he had seen the night before. "Rubbish!" Thomas laughed cheekily. "Every engine knows there are no such things as ghosts." "You weren't there!" Henry puffed with a shiver. "If you're so sure, why don't you take my train down the old line tonight?" "No, thank you," Thomas peeped, backing away. "I've got a busy day tomorrow and need my rest." And he wheeled away as fast as he could. By nightfall, Henry's firebox was sizzling nicely, but he was still worried. As he waited for his driver, he heard the owl hoot again, and when Gordon raced past like a clap of thunder, Henry almost jumped off the rails. "Look! Henry's spooked!" laughed the truck rudely. The other trucks giggled. Scaredy engine! Scaredy engine! I'm not scared, Henry said bravely. But it wasn't really true. As Henry shunted his trucks down the old line, the mist returned, thicker than the night before. Once again, he saw the amber light glowing through the gloom. Here we go, Henry, his driver said. Steady now. The warning sign was still on the tree. There's the fogman's coat again, Henry gasped as he rolled forwards, inch by inch. The trucks had stopped laughing. Now they were as scared as Henry. Suddenly, the signal ahead went red and the gates closed shut by themselves. A light flickered in the old station house and a mysterious figure appeared at the window. A ghost! A ghost! Cried the trucks. Faster! Faster! The frightened trucks jumped down the line and crashed through the gates, taking Henry with them. Stop! Stop! Shouted Henry, but the trucks sped on. Up ahead, Henry saw that a landslide of rocks had fallen on the rails. He had to stop. Henry's driver applied the brakes so hard that they squeaked. Henry managed to stop the train just in time to avoid a crash. Well done, said his driver. Just then, they heard a strange creaky sound. There's your ghost, Henry, smiled the fireman. I think he's chasing us. Henry's driver looked closer. It's old Bailey, the fogman. I tried to warn you about the viaduct, old Bailey told them as he stopped his rusty pump trolley. We're sorry we ignored your warning, said Henry's driver. We thought the viaduct was clear. How can we thank you? I'd like to open this old station again, replied old Bailey, and I promise I won't scare Henry anymore. Soon after, old Bailey's wish was granted. The station opened again with a grand celebration. Instead of a red fogman's coat, old Bailey wore a blue station master's uniform and cap. You will be really useful by warning us of any danger, said the Fat Controller. Let's hear a big thank you to the friendliest ghost on Sodor. Henry whistled happily. He always knew there were no such things as ghosts. My Thomas Story Library, The Snowy Surprise. This is a story about a very snowy winter's day, when Thomas, Percy and their friends worked together to bring a happy Christmas to a mountain village that was in trouble. Thomas enjoyed puffing up and down his branch line every day. He liked the sights and the people he met along the way. One of his favourite places to visit was a small village high in the mountains on the island of Sodor. The people there were very friendly and always waved to Thomas as he passed. On Christmas Eve, the engines woke to find that a winter storm was covering Sodor with a thick blanket of snow. The Fat Controller came to see Thomas and Percy. Percy, you will take Thomas's courtiers and deliver the Christmas post along his branch line today, he said. I need Thomas at the docks. Thomas was disappointed. He wanted to see if his friends in the village needed help in the storm. I'll look after your friends for you, Percy promised. Percy took Annie and Clarabelle and steamed up the mountain. Even in the snow, he was making good time. Suddenly, his driver called out, What's that? Through the blizzard, Percy saw a red glow. As he got closer, he saw that it was a fogman standing by the track with a warning light. Every road and track to the village is cut off by the snow, the fogman shouted. You must fetch help, Percy. Bouncing buffers, Percy thought worriedly. He had promised Thomas he would look after the villagers, and now they were in trouble. Percy knew just what to do. He left his carriages in a siding and puffed quickly to the airfield where Harold the helicopter was resting. "Peep! Peep!" whistled Percy loudly. "The roads to the mountain village are blocked with snow. The villagers need our help." "Right away!" Harold replied as he buzzed up into the air and flew off to tell the Fat Controller. Percy headed back towards the yard, but he hadn't gone far when he saw another engine coming. It was Thomas, wearing a snowplow. After hearing Percy's message, the Fat Controller had sent Thomas to take Terence the tractor and a works train to help the people in the village. "Thank you for looking after my friends, Percy," puffed Thomas. "Now follow me." Percy buffered up behind Thomas's heavy train, helping to push it up the mountain. Thomas's snowplow cleared the snow from the tracks that led to the village. Thomas and Percy had to go very slowly. When they tried to go faster, their wheels slipped and spun on the icy rails. Working together, Thomas and Percy struggled up the steep mountain. At last, Thomas puffed, "There's the village!" Percy was very tired, but he pushed and pushed until the train was safely in the station. Percy heard a loud buzzing from the air and looked up. He was happy to see Harold dropping parcels of food for the people and their pets in the village. Terence the tractor quickly got to work. With his strong caterpillar tracks and snowplow, he cleared the snow so that people could walk safely and drive their cars. "Snow is lovely stuff," said Terence cheerfully as he worked. The children agreed. They were having fun sledging down the hills and making snowmen in the village. At last, the snowstorm passed. Terence ploughed the last road in the village and then rolled back onto Thomas's flatbed. Percy went to fetch Annie and Clarabelle from the siding so that the villagers would have their letters and presents in time for Christmas. By the time he returned, Toby had arrived with Henrietta. They had brought hot chocolate and mince pies for the tired workmen and villagers. As Thomas and Percy chuffed away, the villagers waved goodbye. "Well done, Percy! Well done, Thomas!" they cried. "Thank you for giving us a happy Christmas!" Thomas and Percy smiled. They had never felt more like really useful engines. When Thomas and Percy were out of sight, the villagers talked about a way to thank the engines for their hard work. They made a wonderful plan. That night, the villagers loaded many boxes and parcels into Henrietta, then climbed aboard. Toby puffed through the snowy countryside and steamed into the yard as quietly as he could. Thomas and Percy were fast asleep after their very busy day. The villagers took their boxes and parcels and tiptoed into the shed. Toby didn't know what the villagers were going to do, but it was sure to be a splendid surprise. Thomas was the first to wake up on Christmas morning. He couldn't believe his eyes. "Peep, peep!" he whistled in surprise. The others woke too, and all looked round in wonder. The shed had been magically decorated with tinsel and fairy lights. There was even a Christmas tree with lots of presents underneath. Thomas and his friends whistled in delight. It is a really Merry Christmas for everyone," said Percy, and they all agreed. My Thomas Story Library, The Spring Surprise. This is a story about an important spring day when lambs were born on Farmer McColl's farm. Thomas was sent to collect hay to keep the lambs warm, but he needed to hurry. In the springtime, one of Thomas's favourite places on the island of Sodor was Farmer McColl's sheep field. He liked to see the sheep's smiling faces and to hear them call out when he passed. "Baa, baa," the sheep would say, and "Peep, peep," Thomas would whistle back. Thomas visited the field as often as he could. One day, Thomas was passing the field when Farmer McColl waved to him. Thomas puffed to a stop. "Hello, Thomas," said Farmer McColl. "I'm glad you're here. I have some very special news. Some lambs are going to be born today." Thomas was excited at the happy news. "I can't wait to meet them," he peeped. "Newborn lambs must have soft hay," Farmer McColl told him. "Can you go to the old barn at Marin to collect some?" "Right away," Thomas smiled, and he quickly chuffed away with his empty truck behind him. On his way to Marin, Thomas thought about the lambs. "They will like the hay," he puffed cheerfully. "But I wonder if there's anything else they would like." As Thomas passed the bakery, he saw Percy waiting as his trucks were loaded with freshly baked bread. Thomas stopped to tell him about the lambs. "How exciting!" peeped Percy. "I wish I could see the lambs, but I must deliver this bread." An idea flew into Thomas's funnel. "Maybe the lambs would like some bread," he puffed. "May I have some?" Percy agreed, and his crew quickly loaded a few trays of bread onto Thomas's truck. As Thomas steamed away, he was very pleased. "I wonder what else the lambs might like," Thomas wondered. Soon he saw James at the garden centre and told him about the lambs. "I'd like to see them," chuffed James, but I have to deliver these flowers to the hospital." Thomas was sure the lambs would enjoy the colourful spring flowers too. "May I have some for the lambs?" he asked, and James agreed. Before long, Thomas was nearly at Marin. As he approached the junction, he saw Charlie waiting at a signal. "Hello, Charlie," puffed Thomas. "I'm going to meet some newborn lambs today." "That sounds like fun," chuffed Charlie. I have to collect cheese from the dairy." "Perhaps the lambs would like some cheese," said Thomas. "May I have some?" Charlie agreed, and they went to the dairy, where the cheese was loaded onto Thomas's truck. Thomas hurried on to the old barn. A farm worker was waiting for him, along with stacks of hay bales. He looked behind Thomas. "Your truck is full," he said. "There is no room for the hay." Fizzling fireboxes. I didn't think about that, Thomas worried. I hope the lambs will like bread, cheese and flowers instead of hay." When Thomas returned to the farm, Farmer McColl was surprised that there was no hay in the truck. "I thought the lambs would like these things more than hay," Thomas explained. "No, Thomas!" Farmer McColl looked cross. "The lambs must have hay to keep them warm, and they will be born before the sun goes down." Thomas felt very silly. "I'm sorry," he wheezed. "I will leave these things here and collect the hay straight away." Thomas steamed back to Marin, saying over and over, "I must get the hay. There can be no delay. The lambs will be born by the end of the day." As he passed the water tower, Percy saw him and asked after the lambs. "I'm sorry, Percy, I've no time to talk," Thomas answered as he whooshed by. He saw James at a junction, then Charlie at a station. They wanted him to stop, but Thomas had to hurry on for the lambs. It was getting late by the time Thomas arrived at the old barn. "Hello again," Thomas puffed to the farm worker. "Now I have plenty of room for the lambs' hay. Please will you load it up? Please will you load it on quickly? I must hurry, or the lambs will be cold, he added. Of course I will, Thomas, the man smiled. Once loaded up, Thomas headed back to Farmer McColl's farm. He was tired and thirsty, but he couldn't stop to rest or drink. The lambs would be born soon. Thomas steamed so quickly his axles ached. I must go fast, without delay. The lambs must have hay by the end of the day, he wished. At last, Thomas reached the farm. Was he too late? You're just in time, Farmer McColl said, running up with a smile. I need that soft hay right away. The lambs have just been born. The farmer brought the hay to the barn and opened the doors. Thomas was delighted to see the mother and her little lambs. The next day, Thomas took some school children to visit the farm. He saw the little lambs snuggled up together in the warm hay. Farmer McColl laid out the bread, cheese and flowers that Thomas had brought the day before, and the children enjoyed a splendid spring picnic. I have a surprise for you, Thomas, smiled Farmer McColl. I named this lamb Thomas, after you. Peep, peep, Thomas whistled happily, and the lamb answered,